practical as cinema industry. So, I think we can begin. Welcome. And I gather we have some simultaneous translation. Yes?
Yes.
Invisible to the naked eye. Good. Well, it's my great pleasure to welcome Angela Allen to a chance to say a bit more than she was able to say last night, and maybe range over a few other things as well. I had the pleasure of meeting Angela a few years ago, and I'm astonished at her ability. Her recall is much greater than mine. I have the advantage of being a little younger. It's a great pleasure to have a chance to just recall some of the kind of the circumstances of working back in the 1940s in the period when she started work and was working on The Third Man and many other interesting, although not so famous films of that period. My thought was to ask Angela just to say a word or two about what the job actually consisted of being in continuity, or as we say nowadays, script supervision.
Yes, script supervisor is the title, in Italian, Segretaria di Edizione. It was a job, and still is, which is involved with detailed work. And back when I started, and everybody else did back then, we did not have video, we did not have the Polaroid camera, and therefore you had to, if you could draw, which sadly I couldn't, I could sort of make diagrams, where all the props were, where people were sitting, you could draw the angles, etc. But the job is really, the point of the job is to make sure that when you finish the film, that it can be edited together smoothly. Well, of course, it is edited as you go along, but that's the point of the job. You don't want to have two people looking, shall we say, camera right, who are meant to be speaking to each other. So one has to be looking right and the other left, but it's also got to cut in to what is and was called the master shot. Not every director played whole scenes in a master shot, which is normally meant a long shot. Now, my job was to note down everything, say it's a long shot. I would take the lens, the distance, any filters the cameraman was using into my notes. I would describe everything in great detail. When the camera panned, on what word, when it finished the pan, when you were tracking, what word you started on, what word you finished on, and how close you were, where people were standing in relation to always to the camera. You had to cue the actors sometimes. You also, they ask you to go through their lines with them before a scene, or especially if you're shooting kind of continuously and the director says, go on, say it again. You give them the cue. And you mark down all their clothing so that you make sure, if the girl had the jewellery on and after lunch you still got it on, because people take it off, and that's your job to make sure that they look exactly as they did, should we say, before lunch, or whatever the scene was. You have to break the script down. When you first get it, you read it. Well, you should read it once to see what the story is, and then even twice, and then you start timing it. And I always say it's called an educated guess, because at that point I don't know where the locations are or who the actors are. So you have to act it out yourself, and always remember that actors do have to breathe, so just don't go through the dialogue without stopping. You think about it and act it out. And depending on what length you've come out at, if the script is over long, that's normally first, second, or whatever draft it is they've sent you, they hopefully can adjust it and realise that they've got to cut some things out because it's going too long. And whatever I timed it at, or anybody did, it would always go longer. because you didn't know who was going to be acting in it. And you have to say when it's day and when it's night, and when it's logical to change costume. If somebody's got a bruise, how long that bruise can last, or whatever the injury is, you know, how it can be lessened. And it's just detailed work. You sit beside the director and you mark everything, you know, you write, these are all your notes, and then the director will then decide what takes he likes to print. Well, we did print them in those days, now it's digital. You just say, well, I like to take 6 and I like to take 8. And then when you come to do the close-ups, it's a question of saying, or it used to be, well, which take do you think you really liked best? Because, you know, you've said 6 and 8, but he picked the cup up with the right hand on 6, but he did it on the left hand on, and it's a difference, and he rose in a different place. 6, and of course you can more or less guarantee when you see Russians he'll choose 8 for the next day, but that's all part of the job. So it is a very detailed job, and it's very, well, it takes all your time. You normally never had an assistant, and so you were a department of one, so you could never leave the set. I mean, even to go to the bathroom, you needed to put your hand up like at school, please teacher, can I go for 30 seconds? Don't turn over. And you had to type all these notes up in great detail so that the editor could have them the next morning. So it's a full-time job whereby it's no good saying, oh, well, I got a dinner date this evening, you know, my dinner date's at 7:30, because they're bound to want to work till 8:30 or 9, so you cannot make engagements during the shooting week.
That's a wonderful description of the job. Should stand anybody in good stead here who's thinking of a career. I think it's very good to kind of just be aware of just how demanding the job was, because, you know, if you look at one of these filmographies that we have today, like IMDb,
yes.
Yours is one of those filmographies, and I have it in front of me, and there are a few, as some of you will know, which have a lot of uncrediteds, because there are many very important roles in film which were simply not credited. The number of title cards you had on a film of the 40s or the 50s was very short, and so there's no detail. And reconstructing, which is actually one of the great things about having these sort of crowd-sourced filmographies, has really put a lot of careers in the back where they should be. Your IMDb list is massive.
Yes.
And it's probably not even complete.
But it was, you know, considered, you know, anybody, shall we say, is called below the line, and also the fact that you would never be eligible for an Oscar as a cameraman or a production designer or art director, as we used to call them, and costume designer. Those are all categories that can get Oscars or BAFTAs or Césars, etc., Donatellas, but you know, below the line, frankly, you couldn't make a picture without a prop man, and you know, he's very often not credited. Now, of course, the credits now are so long, you think you're going to seeing another picture at the end, especially when you're seeing Star Wars or one of those, you know, blockbusters.
Yes. Indeed. We won't go into that at the moment. the credits, yes, they go on it forever. Just to get to focus in on before we get to the third man, you were relatively new to the business when you got to work on the third man. You'd only worked on about 4 or 5 pictures beforehand.
Yes, I was the youngest in the business, and I trained at the Court Studios, and the third man was made by the Court Studios, and I got asked back to be on the second unit, and the woman who was on the first unit, Peggy McClafferty, was wonderful and very well known. So I was, although I'd technically sort of done my training, I was, you know, very glad to you know, watch her work and work under her. And, you know, it was a wonderful experience for me because it was going abroad for the first time, even though it was, you know, war-torn Vienna.
Well, I was just going to say, it wasn't so easy going abroad in 1948 and 49, was it? Because there were all sorts of currency restrictions and things like that, which made life very difficult.
Oh, yeah, very. And we could, when we went abroad, I think in those days we were only allowed something like £25. I don't think it had even gone to 50 when we did that. And when we went to Vienna, we could all, including the actors, we could only stay in one hotel because everything else was divided up and was the military and belonged to Americans or Russians, etc. So we all had to do that. But strangely enough, the food, you know, you in a way, you got more food in Vienna than you did back in England because we were still on rationing, you know.
But rationing got worse in 48.
Yes.
Bread rationing came in. Yes, you're probably glad to escape to some of those Sacher tortures and things like that in Vienna.
Well, I could tell a funny story, but I think really it's, you know, telling it against the English. They took the crew to Vienna, and our first night there, they took us all to a hotel, and they served Wiener Schnitzel. And the English boys said, "We're not going to eat meat done up as fish. We want eggs and bacon." I mean, it's sort of gone down in the business, but it's quite true, they did say that.
You'd worked on earlier Korda pictures just before Third Man. You worked, for instance, on Bonnie Prince Charlie, of which much was hoped, although it didn't quite materialise. But was the Third Man, I mean, did people have a sense that it was going to be a major production? Was there a sense of expectation about it? Was it a very big film for Korda?
I don't know. I think, you know, every film you work on, you hope is going to be a success. You certainly knew we got very good actors in it. And Carol was a master director. He'd done Fallen Idol and Odd Man Out, and, you know, was greatly respected. So we were all hoping it was going to be, you know, a good film, but you never know. And I think even Carol wouldn't have thought that it would still be being shown, you know, all these years later. I think it's 69 years now since we started in 48.
Yes.
49, 48.
Exactly, yeah. And I mean, the other thing that probably wasn't much in your minds at the time was this was the period when British filmmaking was in a very difficult position because of the economic situation and because of the tension with Hollywood. That all the producers were had their backs against the wall. It was the time when the Americans had turned off the supply of films from Hollywood for 6 months, and so Korda and Rank jumped into the breach. And well, not all of their ideas succeeded.
No, and although David O. Selznick, you know, was technically, you know, one of the producers, we never saw him in Vienna. He never appeared.
You were probably rather lucky.
Oh, yeah, well, I met him later, but yes, and also the version you're seeing now is, I think, is Carol's cut, and it's Carol's voice at the beginning doing the narration.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. Yes, he did that, and the shot in the end where his fingers, where you see fingers coming up out of the grating, there's the fingers of Carol actually. He did that.
It's a whole new meaning to hands-on direction.
Yes, that's right. Joyce very much. He never gave. Carol was not a director. Well, most good directors never give actors line readings and telling them how to say it. You might say a bit more, a bit less, but a good director doesn't, you don't tell them how to say it.
And of course, Reed's background was as an actor himself, so I guess it was natural for him to jump in ways like that.
Well, yes, but he was also, you know, he was a tall, imposing man, and so he was definitely the chief, the general in charge of, you know, people had respect for him, and he knew how to control his actors and his group. He was very much fun.
the film, of course, as I guess everybody knows, and I think you talked a bit about this last night, was like many films, of course, made really in two sort of separate parts, the location part and the studio part. And there's rather more studio than perhaps some people realise.
Yes, there is. And, well, you know, the park scene, and well, in fact, we shot her wonderful walk, and it was interesting. I remember that shot because it was the second unit that Carol always came in to direct everything with an artist. And she walked, and then he said to Guy Hamilton, who was his first, put her back a bit further. Then take 3, put her even further back. And then the production was saying, oh, you're going to cover it, of course, Carol. And he said, no, I'm not. And he took that gamble that she walks and walks and walks. The last shot in the film when she walks past. And that's the take he chose, the one where she's father's back and walks.
She is very far back indeed.
Exactly. And
when you see it on the screen the size of the Terzo Maggiore, you're absolutely struck by that.
Yes, and that was, we shot that, you know, so we did the things like that, and the digging up the grave, and so Orson's first shot in the picture was literally when he, when they found him and he arrived, was when he walks across the park, past the carousel, and he's on his way to meet him on the wheel, and that was his very first shot in the picture. And then he used to disappear. They used to chase him around Europe and get him back again. And the scene in the wheel, of course, was done in the studio by that projection. I remember I was up and we shot the plates going round and around that wheel, shooting with that for days on end. And all that was done in the studio, and really was wonderfully matched between the art department and Carol and making it all work together. And he gets off and he walks away again. And then the sewer sequence, the first time he goes down the sewer, he did go down, there's a close-up with his head against, the wheel wall. But because of, seeing the boys eating the sandwiches, well, this was disgusting, he's American and all that. And so he didn't go down, and that's why we had to build everything. And then, when he wasn't there also at the beginning of where Guy's running and there's a shadow running up the streets, which ideally he should have been doing it, but he didn't appear. So Guy Hamilton, the assistant, had to put the coat and hat on and do the running. But, he eventually, as we said, turned up, and, well, I think it is one of the great entrances in the film. That close-up, wonderfully shot, and the look.
Well, it's one of the great entrances in the whole cinema, because there's so much, it's so held back, isn't it? And so in a funny sort of way, your story of how naughty Wells could be, and others could tell similar stories of him keeping them guessing, it rather fits the plot of the film, because he is meant to be a shadowy figure. I mean, my goodness, he was shadowy in production.
Oh, he certainly was. And I realised again last night, without seeing the film, quite often, but even recently, but how long it takes before you actually meet the third man and you get that shot. And he's in the film actually really very, very little.
Very little indeed.
Yeah.
Well, less is more. There is a sense of...
that's the thing you try and tell a lot of directors, less is more.
Indeed. But I'm tempted to because your recall of the detail is just so wonderful. You were saying earlier when we started about 6, 7, 8 takes. I have a sense that, well, I know that there were many fewer takes were normal at that time, just because of rationing film stock and so forth. And there was just a sense of economy. People didn't shoot endless takes. So, what's your memory of the number of takes that would be typical of those locations?
Oh, if you've rehearsed it enough, 4 or 5, you might have to have cuts because something went wrong with the camera and all those kind of things that were technical, or the track or something. But I mean, all those actors, Trevor Howard, the rest of the cast, I mean, they didn't fluff, they didn't forget their lines, they didn't mess about, you know. So, as long as it was, you know, he'd rehearsed it and got what he wanted, and he knew how much he was going to cover, so he was always covered, even if maybe in the master shot it wasn't quite as perfect as you would have liked, but he knew he was probably not going to use it in that shot, so he was going to have a close-up. So he could always get it that way.
And I was also thinking last night, seeing the film again, I've seen it a few times too, but the scene with the wheel, of course, that's at the Prato, isn't it?
Yes.
Which we went to see it a few years ago. It's rather different today, to put it mildly. But was that, it didn't really broken down the stage, was that pretty much how you found the Prato?
Oh yes, it was, you know, it was still there, and strangely enough, the very first shot when he walks towards the carousel, that was just that one shot, and then we needed that carousel again later when he goes, and it had disappeared, and we never did find out what happened, because it was, you know, there were certain carousels that presumably, like most fairs, go on tours.
Yes.
That one we never found again, so we were all desperate to sort of match it up and get something, but we never did find, they never did find it. Yes, I mean, the whole of Vienna was very, you know, it was rubble everywhere. And, you know, when I've been back, when I went back with Guy, he got quite right, very angry when the Austrian said to us, "Has it changed much?" And we both said, "What do you mean, has it changed? You've got wonderful new buildings, white, the wheels have taken the Prato, the actual wheel has got, the carriages are different, you know, colour now, they're painted different colour." Everywhere we went, we had to go round showing with the Austrians where we shot. Has it changed? I mean, you know, it's a very well done city. In fact, when we arrived, the first question, the guy had already done his, was, "Has it changed? Has the airport changed?" And I said, "Well, look at it, it was a shack. That's all there was. And look at it now, it's a modern airport." You know, they're very pedantic.
Well, it's not just that, also, it's that a friend of mine actually has run a business for some time, which is touring the locations and the sewers.
You mean Dr. Brigitte
Timmermans, indeed.
Yes, one of the most famous tours in Vienna is the Third Man
It
tour.
is, yes.
And she, you know, because she's obsessed by the film, said to Guy and I, "Was that the stone?" Well, I mean, we're in the sewer. "It was that the stone his head was against." And Guy and I said, "We've done 50 films, you know, we're going to count." I mean, she's obsessed with it. She's written the book. And of course, they tried to take a bit more credit than they should. You know, well, the Austrian cameraman did that shot, and I said, "No, he did not do that shot, and he certainly did not do the end shot, you know, where Valley walks up." But, you know, if it makes them happy with the shot.
Well, it does. It's become part of Vienna's sort of selling proposition. Come to the city which was made famous by the Third Man.
And the film still plays there, I believe, I'm not sure how many times a week, on the Ring, in the same cinema, and I'm told that it's going to play as long as he's alive, because he owns, I presume, the cinema. And in fact, when I went there, I think it's maybe 2 years ago or 3, to the English bookshop, which was launching books, there's this enormous photo of Orson as you enter the city, and I thought, well, they must be doing, but no, it's permanent. I mean, it's extraordinary, it really is.
It's perhaps one of the most extreme examples of a film coming to stand for a city at a particular moment in its history, as you say.
And it's even got its own museum.
Yes.
And they have a stamp collection for it. I mean, a genuine issue.
Two other aspects of the film, which are terribly famous, but I just thought I'd ask for your memories or your perspective on them. One is at the shooting stage, the Dutching, the tilting, which of course Carol Reed had done already. That was obviously all foreseen. Did it cause any kind of issues during the shooting?
he and Bob Krasker, the cameraman, and you know, they waited down the streets on Odd Man Out and used tilting. And we never used the word Dutch in those days, you know, tilt the camera and the camera's, you know, tilt it left or right. I mean, it didn't always have, you know, a particular rhythm to it, but it worked. But, no, yes, I mean, that was decided between him and Robert, yeah.
Robert Krasker, yeah. And the music. That's the other thing which, I mean, it's not your department, as it were. According to a certain legends, it was more or less accidental that it was overheard and then was decided to make it the music for the film.
Yes.
Is there any truth in that?
Yes, Guy had taken Carol to a Weinstube, and where they not as the players, and he'd heard this, and they were thinking of, you know, sort of like having, at that point, perhaps a temporary score, you know, while you're cutting. And Guy went and got Anton, who didn't read music, and brought him along, you know, to Carol, where he played in the hotel for him. And Carol then said he wanted to use that music in the film, and Selznick and I think everybody else, and William Corder, because I think Muir Matheson was the head of music in England. You know, all said no, but Carol was quite adamant about it. And he worked with Karas, who didn't speak any English, and Carol didn't speak any German, but they seemed to get on and established a relationship. It changed, of course, that man's life, you know, from being a quite poor zither player in the Stubbles to travelling the world with it, and I presume getting the rights on the recordings.
I wonder about that. Anyway, let's not go there.
No, that's not, but you know, I mean, it just changed his life.
Absolutely, completely.
Yes.
And again, it's one of the, I mean, it is one of the most extraordinary scores because it's unique to that film, and one can't think of many other films that have a zither score.
No, I don't think there had been one before that. No.
So it remains kind of unique. As soon as you hear a few notes of that, you're immediately transported to the world of post-war Vienna.
I mean, Carol didn't, I think most of us didn't even know about a zither. It wasn't a common instrument, so it was something new.
When you got back to Britain, because you shot the location stuff first,
yes,
obviously, I mean, were there problems in matching? I mean, obviously the most impressive piece of work is the reconstruction of the sewers. And every time I look at the film and see it that big, I'm sort of trying to quite make sense of what I know, which is that it was done in the studio, the bulk of that work.
Well, a lot of it was brilliantly matched by the art department. I mean, of course, they'd taken lots of photos and measurements and things, but it really was extremely well done. And of course, we do go back, you know, in the cutting to using the real ones. We had some second unit, we had the ones in white are the real sewer police of Vienna.
Yep.
Pardon me. But but all the shots with Orson, you know, had to be done, and even then, some of them, of course, we did use a double in the real sewers running. Thank you. Along. I mean, when you sort of see the feet going through water, that's, you know, had to be the double, because he wasn't, you know, always in the mood to do those sort of things. But yes, it was brilliantly matched, and all that bit was done, and you really can't tell the difference. No.
We were talking a little earlier at lunch about another of the relatively unsung figures who was so important in the film, and that's Vincent Corder, Alex's brother, the art director, production designer, as he would be called now, who, I mean, I've always thought he was really the creative genius, because he could, for Corder, from the early 30s right through to the late 40s, he produced an astonishing variety of sets, and they're all absolutely immaculate. So, I mean, Corder had to reconstruct the sense of the interiors, the Viennese interiors, back in Shepperton.
Yes.
In Venom, yeah.
No, Shepperton.
Shepperton, sorry,
Yes.
it was Shepperton, yes.
Yes, no, they had to build, and it was a big build, you know, I mean, it was, I'm sure, of course, it was an added expense, because they had thought, you know, they could have shot much more there, but, no, he was very, and Carroll was always very clever. He would know he could have a piece of wood or something that could bridge the gap or from the location to a set. He was very, very knowledgeable technically on things like that. He could always make it work. And he, you know, Corder, Vincent, had a very good team behind him. He had good painters and a good assistant art director who he trained and who went on to do lots of other things. John Hawksworth, yes. No, and I have to say that people back in those days, like when I started, they were very well trained. They had really, you know, worked their way up. Nobody was, you know, a university graduate then, or if they were normally in a different kind of area. They were in writing or something like that, but certainly not in technical grades. And all the cameramen of that ever had worked their way up from being the clapper boy to becoming a cameraman.
What's your... several people were asking me last night, was the film an immediate success? And I couldn't recall the range of response to it when it came out. My sense is that it was a pretty immediate success, but is that your memory of it?
Yes, but I think it was a success. You know, it got well received, and then it got the Oscars. But you know, it wasn't in those days the sort of like it is the big openings today. But it was a success. Yes, definitely.
And must have been a lot for Corder's reputation, because he'd taken a bit of a battering in the late 40s, hadn't he? And this was a kind of resurgent Corder.
Oh, I think it put him back on the map with the sort of government and the money and everything else, isn't it?
Yes, I think it did. Yes, absolutely.
I mean, although Selznick, I think, did try to take a lot more credit than was due to him, but that wouldn't be abnormal. You know, it was Corder and Carroll who put the thing together and done it.
They were seen as right at the core of it. You've, I'm wondering whether, in fact, we've got a number of people here who are bursting to ask questions. Thought there might be one or two. So we ought, before we completely run out of time, we have got a bit more time, but there are some other things I'm sure we'd like to talk about. But I just wonder if we ought to create a bit of space for those who would like to ask some questions, since we're in the flow at the moment. You're nodding vigorously. So I think you should have a chance. Oh, wait a minute, there's another one.
I presume that Orson Welles was highly professional and always turned up on time?
Highly unprofessional. You know, he was supposed to be in Vienna at a certain date. He wasn't there. He was in Paris. They sent somebody to Paris. He's flown to Rome. He's coming there, and so it went on. You know, when he was there, I think they managed to get him onto the set on time, but in the morning for a call. But definitely not the easiest person to deal with.
Yes, Michael Powell had a similar experience when he tried to get Wells involved with Oh Rosalinda. There was a charming series of evasive messages from Wells, and he never turned up for that. Yes, sorry. Yeah, I think you might need the microphone so we can put translation.
The question is the following. I recently saw a shadowing of Third Man, a documentary film by Friedrich Baker, in which David Corder said that Vincent Corder, I don't know if you can confirm this version, Vincent Corder was a person who was able to convince finally Orson Welles to get out from his hotel, promising that he could find an Italian magician who could was able to teach him some magic trick. And since I'm writing something on this part of Orson Welles' interest, i.e. Orson Welles as a magician, I'd like to know if you ever heard this version, if you know something about this, or if you know somebody who can confirm this legend. I don't know if it's true, because David Corda mentioned this idea, but didn't say who was this Italian magician.
Well, okay.
Well, no, I certainly hadn't heard of that. I mean, we all know that Orson, had a diverse career, and well, I worked with him twice more actually, but he was, it was with Houston. He had a day's work, and he did know his lines on Moby Dick, and he was on Routes to Heaven. He turned up because he happened to be in Paris, but I saw him on a French film too, but. I don't know, I'm afraid I can't tell you whether Vincent had anything to do with magical powers.
No. My guess is that would not be the kind of thing that would come into the production history of the film.
No.
It would be to do with the very complicated life of Orson Welles, on which quite a lot has been written and speculated. So I'm afraid that probably doesn't fall within our remit today. I'm just looking around to see if anybody else is yes, Jerry?
I was wondering what attracted you into continuity in the first place, and whether you think it has the status that it deserves within the film industry, both then and now.
Well, I got into it because originally I thought I'd like to do makeup and hair, but because I couldn't draw, and in those days you did have to be able to draw. That's not true today. And I've had secretarial training. I did not go to university, and I was told about this job, and I tried secretarial work and realised I didn't have the right demeanour. I wasn't subservient enough. And I'd been taken to a film studio, and I thought, this is what I want to do. And I literally knocked on doors, and somebody said, well, you might get a job and go down there to that studio, which I did. And they were looking for an assistant. And that's how I got in. And I managed, well, I guess I must have succeeded, because I've stayed on doing it. And it's, I don't regret it in any way. It's a wonderful job to learn about making pictures, because you are sitting there and all departments come to you and ask you questions. And I will say that I was very lucky in working for somebody like Carol, who was virtually a mentor and taught me a tremendous amount. Then I went on to John Huston, and I did 14 films with him. And I've enjoyed it, and I've had wonderful travels. And the only thing is that I, would have liked, but who knows whether I would have had the talent to go on to directing. And being a woman was also much more difficult. The woman's role in filmmaking was considerably limited in my day. It was down to occasional editors, there were a couple. And the script girl, and then in the office. But, there were no women cameramen or anything like that, or photographers.
No, that's very true. I did a program recently about what I call forgotten women filmmakers, and there were some, of course, who were making particularly documentaries in the 40s, but who just weren't able to keep on going, and kind of gave it up, because they realised that as they moved into the 50s, there were even less opportunities for women, not more.
Yes, I remember one Kay Mangan.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was thinking. She was one of my...
Yes.
by cases. And Jill Craigie, also very talented filmmaker who gave up pretty much. It was very difficult, wasn't it, for women?
And then, you know, it's only really since television that women have, you know, gone into it and become producers and things. But the trouble is that nowadays, when there are a lot of women in film, is that because they've never worked on the floor, a lot of them, the producers, they don't really know what the job is. And it isn't, and I reiterate this, it isn't being a glorified typist or secretary, which is what a lot of people think it is. Because you use, well, these days you use a computer, but, you know, in those days you typed your notes, etc., etc.
And just coming back to your later career, post Third Man, as you say, you made a tremendous number of films with Don Huston, and that must have been really quite a kind of working relationship. I mean, he must have come to depend upon you quite a bit in the course of that.
Yes, he did, and in those days, you know, they respected your job. I mean, if producers came and asked him what he was going to shoot for that sequence, he'd say, well, I'm not going through it with you, she knows, you know, don't ask her, she knows the way I'll shoot, which I did. I mean, really good directors have a style, I think you'll agree on that. And like a painter, he has a style. And once you've worked with them, although the story's changed, you know the way they're going to shoot, you know what they need and what they want. And one felt in those days, well, the directors I worked with, I was very lucky, that they let you participate and feel that, even if you weren't a part of the creative team, you were helping to make it a better film. And I'm hearing now in England that is hardly the case today, and people aren't trained anyway. They really aren't.
Well, not like you were trained. That's true. I'm afraid we are almost out of time, and I gather we are pretty much out of time, sadly. I feel there's a lot more we could ask you about and benefit from your wonderful recall. And maybe other people will take the opportunity now that they know you to see during the rest of the time you're here. But thank you very much for sharing your memories with us.
Thank you.